All right, good morning, everybody. It's 9:30. We're going to go ahead and start class. We're talking a little bit about Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket today. It's the short story you have that's been assigned. You're going to need some background and history for this, so that's what today's lesson is going to be focused on. Let's take a look at Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. All right. So this is a story by Jack Finney, and I called the lecture History and Context to Lost to Technology because the things that they're talking about within Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket basically wouldn't happen today, and there's a lot of reasons why. You have to figure out that Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket takes place during the 1950s. This is after World War II, and the world today is much, much different than it was back then, technology wise. So today we are able to do things with technology that Jack Finney, the author, probably couldn't even imagine. And so when we read this, we kind of have to take that into context. And that's what this little PowerPoint is going to be about. So this is considered Pulp Fiction. I know a lot of you have heard that in terms of the Quentin Tarantino movie, but that actually came from somewhere. Pulp Fiction is a type of literature. It really enjoyed its heyday, which means its popularity, during the first half of the 20th century, particularly during the economic downturn of the 1930s called the Great Depression. So lots of hardships going on, and that accompanied with the rising literacy rates in the US and Great Britain allowed this type of fiction to really take off and take space. Um, it's called escapist literature because people were experiencing hardships at the time, and this was a distraction and an escape from the realities of life. Like, you know what? I don't have enough to eat today, or my parents can't find a job, but I can lose myself in these stories, and my world seems a little bit better. The thing that separates pulp fiction from other types of literature is this escapist kind of thing. It's about talking about other worlds, it's talking about adventures, fantastic ideas that kind of let you escape your crappy life at the time. It's often lowbrow subject matter, right? So lowbrow means crude humor. Um, Instead of things like movies today, think Seinfeld or The Simpsons or Family Guy or even Rick and Morty, right? Those are type of lowbrow humor. We're not talking Oscar-winning stuff here. This is lowbrow, common man humor type of stuff. That's what distinguishes it from other fiction genres. The emergence of these magazines also, like I said before, they coincided with rising literacy rates. So more people could read, therefore, they published more magazines like this for young and aspiring readers and even older readers for that sense of escapism. They were called poor cousins to things like Collier's or Good Housekeeping or McCall or Family Circle. These are popular books or magazines at the time. Um, and in contrast to like the glossy pages you see on the front of the magazines, think like Cosmo or GQ today. These were just low grade paper. And you make low grade paper using inexpensive wood fibers called pulp. And that's why these were called pulp fictions. Okay. That's where they get their name from. They also were known for paying their writers very, very little. So not only was there a lot of it, they paid their writers poorly as well. And some of these writers, most of them are lost to history, but some of them became very, very famous. Um, it allowed these publishers to publish these magazines cheaply, and then they could offer it to everybody cheap as well. And that's why everybody was able to read it. Um, it's easy for people to identify Pulp Fiction at the time. They had names such as Amazing Stories, Mysteries in Space, New Love Magazine, Saucy Stories, Weird Tales. They are, like I said, aimed at general audiences. And you know that phrase, you can't judge a book by its cover? This is what this is trying to get you to do. It's trying to entice you to read these stories using lurid pictures and imagery. These are the ones I could show. There are others that like half naked women on them being slung over the back. Like they can get pretty racy. So these are the ones I could actually show. Fantastic worlds, new adventures, all kinds of different things going on at the time. It was also a time of the first science fiction as well, like using science to create new stories. Most of the time, stories before this era were based in what people were used to: farm life, city life. There wasn't any fantastic stories out there. I mean, they had stuff like um, scary stories, but nothing like science fiction. These publications, they catered to a particular niche in the market, right? So fans of westerns, romance, they had science fiction, they had detective stories, big time into war stories too. Remember, this is after the World War II and World War One, very much in like the prime of the Cold War. So war was um, very popular. But no matter what your interest was, there was some sort of pulp fiction that you could attach to that you would be able to like because they came in so many genres. The magazines, they remained active for a very long time. Some of them almost into the 2000s. They put out hundreds, if not thousands, of issues. Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine is actually where Jack Finney, the author of um, the book, the story you're about to read, Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket, was actually first published. So a little bit of correlation there between the two. All right. Like I said, colorful art, really interesting. They wanted you, by looking at the art on the cover, to say, this looks awesome, I'm going to buy it. So, quick publishing, no internet. Like I said, westerns, romance, science fiction, detective, war stories. They were short form. These wouldn't be long novels. Okay, it would be 10 to 20 pages or less, and it would be serialized, which means that it would end one chapter, and then you would have to wait a week or 2 weeks for the next issue to come out so that you can continue the story. A lot of these stories ended each chapter on some sort of a cliffhanger, so you want to be incentivized into reading the next one. But it wasn't like just one piece. There were several pieces in each magazine, several short stories. Like I said, serialized. Many of these serialized stories were brought together later by publishers and made into books. If you've read Fahrenheit 451, that was originally published in pulp magazines just like these, in a chapter by chapter book. And it wasn't called Fahrenheit 451 either. I think it was called The Fireman when it was first serialized. So it was good for aspiring writers, these pulp fiction novels, because you could easily get, you didn't have to be a huge author to be published. So that brought a lot of people in. It got a lot of different styles, and it got some of these aspiring writers lots of ways to be published, right? You didn't become rich uh, writing for pulp fiction, but what happened was you can get noticed, and several of them were pulled into other deals and were able to make books at a later date because their talent was recognized. Um, Most of these are lost today. Some of the big ones are still around. I think Amazing Stories is still around. A lot of these transitioned from being pulp fiction readers into some sort of comic book or longer serialized graphic novels. So that could be a good analogy today. But they were quick put out stories. Authors, there are a few that built respectable literary careers. I have them right here. Jack Finney, the one that we're reading right now, is one of them. Oops, let's go back. Uh, um, Edgar Rice Burroughs is another one. Raymond Chandler, H.P. Lovecraft, the person who brought up the whole Cthulhu um, mythology, started as a pulp fiction writer, and a lot of his writings were serialized and then later brought into being a book. So lots of writers get their start right here. Pulp fiction today. In the 1960s, pulp fiction really lost its popularity. There were other things. TV was taking over like big time. Like I said, they were replaced by comics and magazines, but like it's had a real impact on the things that we listen to and read today. So think about it. Uh, Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote the original Tarzan. Tarzan has been put into 65 different movies. Okay, that's since 1918 when they first had the first Tarzan movie. So even though they are not a part of our our reading today, it has a huge influence on the genre, on the way we read, on the types of movies that are out there. Big influence on our society today. The Tarantino movie, Pulp Fiction, if you've ever seen it, this really exemplifies the pulp genre. Lots of little stories put together, and eventually they tie together and make one big story. There's lots of action in there. There are several different plots. They're not always in order. If you've watched Pulp Fiction, you're like, hey, wait a minute. Didn't that character die? Why are they still on the screen? All kinds of timelines getting crazy, and this exemplified Pulp Fiction. You see the famous cover right here. This is the poster from Pulp Fiction. This is Mia, one of the characters, seductively wishing you to come in and let's go ahead and read this because this is going to be awesome. She's got a gun sitting in front of her. Her legs are up. She's got high heels on. She's got a black dress. Her cleavage is showing. She's smoking a cigarette. She's got red lipstick on. So one of the throwbacks to some of the more lurid Pulp Fiction covers we have right here on a movie poster from 1990s. So I gave you a little bit of background on pulp. Now let's go 1950s tech and limitations, right? Let's think of what we have today that we didn't have then. Things like the internet, a computer at every desk, good calculators, most people being able to read. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Um, the workplace in a novel like Contents of the Dead, or in a story like Contents of the Dead Man Pocket, is very um, typical of 1950s middle class corporate employee. So it's very relatable to the people who would probably be reading it. Finney presents Tom Beneke. He's the protagonist in Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. He's just a middle class employee. He works at a grocery store. Grocery stores are much more accessible today than they've ever been. Like you really had to know your butcher and your produce guy back in the 1950s, and think about all the products that you had. Like, how are they doing all this research? Well, that's what this story. That's what Tom does. Tom is a researcher. He's just a mid-level manager guy. Like, okay, go put the beans on special at that, on the end cap over there. But what he's done is he's done a lot of um, research into what people are buying, into how they are buying it, into how to put things in a store to make people buy it more than if you put it somewhere else. And the way he's had to do that is literally spend his days and weekends when he's not working taking notes of people coming through and picking up items and which items are selling and was it on special? Did we have a sign behind it? Like, why were things selling what they were doing? He was one of the first really to think about market research, right? Why do people buy things when they buy things? What's behind it? But the technology in the day is like literally a piece of paper that he is writing on the whole time to take notes. And he's got notes and it's usually on, one of those legal pads and he's got a pen and he's writing it. And that's how he does it. Um, the story opens up with Tom putting two sheets of flimsy, it says, and copy paper into a typewriter. So this is how you wrote memos back then. This is copy paper in the article right here. Damn it! This is the copy paper. This is what the original typing looks like, and then when you put the copy paper behind, it actually transfers the mark to the next paper. So when you hit a button on a typewriter, a little key comes up and slams into the paper, and it has the font on it, the letter. And so when it slams into the letter, it transfers ink from the key onto the paper. Now, to make more copies, you literally needed a piece of carbon paper behind it to transfer that mark when it struck the paper into the other pages. So, people used to type very heavy to make sure that that transferred. If not, there were no photocopiers. You literally gave it to your secretary and you said, "Hey, I need 10 copies of this." And she would sit there and put her carbon paper, and you couldn't do more than 2 or 3 at a time. So literally, your secretary would have to type this 4 times in order to get enough copies for you for your meeting. And so that's where typists come from. It was just somebody sitting in a at a desk with a stack of papers that she had to type over and over again. So that's where typist comes from. Um, that's kind of the technology in the day. You made your notes on a paper, you had to type them out. Any additional copies would need to go out to a typist to go ahead and copy them. But more than just the tech, right? From memos to typewriters to paper to secretaries to typists, right? More than that, it was a different world. Think Mad Men if you've ever seen that, okay? Corporate business was very different. In the 1950s, all your employees had to be well groomed in appearance, regardless of your position. Whether you were the lowest guy on the table or the boss, everybody was dressed in a suit. There was no such thing as casual Fridays. Men wore suit and ties, women wore dresses or skirts and blouses with high heels. That was it. Tom, the narrator in the story, would have owned several suits. Most of them probably made of gray flannel because it was the cheapest. He's not a higher executive, he's middle level. He had dress shirts, dress shoes, ties. Offices didn't have cubicles back then. You were in a huge open office layout. The typical corporate work area was large open rooms, and they had identical desks just crammed in all over the place, usually in rows. Private offices were only for the executives. Like today, the coveted corner office with the windows, like, yeah, nobody had windows. Everybody was just in a room all together. Think about that. There's no real natural light. You're kind of just under the glow of the fluorescence like all day. That's why rising through the ranks and getting an office with windows was so appealing. But think more than just that, right? Like, not just natural light is gone. Tom or any of these executives would have spent their day inhaling secondhand smoke because everybody and their mother smoked. Okay, it wasn't until the end of the 1960s that they linked smoking to cancer, and then they started banning it from the workplace. So you would be in a room, a whole bunch of people, um, no privacy, open layout, with more than half of the people in there smoking. You're sitting there sucking down secondhand smoke all day. No real air conditioning, right? Just fans to move it around, so probably hot. And also um, smoky, hot, gross. Okay. Drinking was very common. Like, you'd go to lunch, there's a thing called a 3 martini lunch where you would go and you'd have 3 martinis with your lunch and you'd be buzzed for the rest of the day while you were working. And this was the norm. Like, nobody batted an eye at that. Sexism all over the place. Women were seen as executives, women were secretaries. They were the typist pool. There were few women that held management positions. Doesn't matter if they prove themselves valuable or not. Doesn't matter that we just came off World War II where they basically took over all the men's jobs. It didn't matter. You're not getting a management degree, right? Um, there was a lot of surveys at the time that showed discomfort with both men and women at the idea of working for a female boss. All right, so this was not very progressive at all, and hand in hand with the exclusion of women from managerial positions, there was sexual harassment going on all over the place. It was rarely spoken of, but happened all the time. Actually, the term sexual harassment, which refers to unwelcome encounters of a sexual nature in the workplace, um, that phrase only really started popping up about 20 years after Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket came out. So it wasn't heard of at all back then. It was not uncommon for males to make sexual remarks to women and even advances on women in the workplace. Um, with the rise of women in the workplace, laws have been passed making sexual harassment illegal in any workplace setting. And in fact, we even have a sexual harassment clause within our syllabus because Mount Sac said we have to have it in there. So It's become a lot different than this world in the 1950s. And we need to keep that in mind as we're reading. This whole story takes place in one apartment building, or one apartment in an apartment building. Now, apartments in New York are very different from apartments around here, right? So here is the typical older style New York apartment right here on the left. You'd see a fire escape, lots of windows. Your apartment may consist of two of these windows, maybe four, maybe five, like it has here. But you would get a part of a floor of an basically tall, high-rise apartment building. The middle one shows it a little bit better. So this is all housing. This is an apartment block. These are just apartments going down the block right here. So there's a lot of people crammed into a little bit of space. Most of it has a lot of verticality to it. And usually the higher the floor, the better the views, right? The better the views, the more expensive it is. So to live on the top floor was very desirable. It showed that you were doing well. If you ever heard of a series called The Jeffersons, it had a opening song, and the the words to it were moving on up, and that's what it meant. They were moving up in the apartment world. They were moving their floors up, which meant that they were doing a lot better. That's why penthouse apartments are on the top. It's got the best view. It's the most expensive, right? Most of them had wood floors like this right here, and this would be a typical New York apartment. Furniture here, wood on the floor, a couple of windows. Right here, this is a heating furnace or radiator. I'm sorry, it's a radiator. What happens is it's hooked up to your hot water, and your hot water runs through these pipes, and these pipes get hot, and then it warms the room through radiant heat. Okay, it'll radiate out. So if you were cold, and it gets really cold in New York, especially in the winter, you would want this radiator around your seating area so that you can stay warm. Um, Windows were usually thickly painted. Some of them open, some of them didn't. Some of them are really hard to get open after years and years of painting and sanding and painting over them, making them try and look good on the inside. Um, as you can imagine, these apartment buildings, some of them had been there since the early 1900s, so 50 years old apartment buildings. Um, a lot of them weren't maintained the best, so that kind of adds to the drama and suspense of the story as you read along. Keep that in mind. But we don't have apartment living like this on the West Coast. We have a lot more room to spread out. We have apartment buildings that might be 5 or 6 stories tall, especially in the suburbs, especially in the San Gabriel Valley. Like, this isn't a style of living we have here. You kind of got to get your head into a different space, a different framework to think about some of the drama that unfolds and why there's conflict, why there's suspense, and why it would be kind of so scary, right? Um, the main conflict, let's move to the main conflict in the novel. The main conflict is man versus nature, right? It's Tom with his research that he spent months and months and months gathering, and he's struggling with nature to make sure he doesn't lose it, right? So he's got the research, he's got this paper and his work, and is it worth his life? The other thing that comes into play here is Tom's relationship with his wife. What is that like? Think about it. Is she a stay-at-home mom? Well, they don't have any kids. Is she a stay-at-home wife at this time? Does she have her own job? If he's spending all his days and nights and weekends doing this research, what does that mean for his wife? Has he been spending a lot of quality time with her? What is their relationship like? The wife physical appearance is described right at the beginning of the novel, and you can say that she's a very pretty lady. She wants to go out to a movie with her husband and have dinner and drinks. Now, movies weren't like in the 1950s, aren't like today. I can't sit down and start streaming something. Even in the show, it's different. You used to have very long movies back then, over 2 hours. And usually when you went to the movies, it was for the night. There was a double feature going on with a newsreel in between. So When you're saying I'm going to the movies, it's not I'll be back in a couple hours. It's a 4, 5, 6 hour affair, especially if you have dinner attached to it. Your dinner, your double feature, and then time in between the two movies for intermission. It's a really long time. So when Tom says goodbye to his wife and she leaves to go to the movies, he's not going to see her for 6, 7 hours, and he understands that she's going to be back probably late, and that all plays into the drama of what's going on in Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. A couple of questions that we had. Like I said, if you have questions, you could pop them in the chat. But a couple of questions we had yesterday. I'm going to end the slideshow here. We had a couple questions on work and how to turn it in, and I'm going to go ahead and go over that quickly. I dropped today's reading for night. It is the chapter 2. You should be reading chapter 2 today. I put the audio recording or the read into the chat. So go ahead or the conversation. So if you have questions, go ahead and go there. My Teams is coming up. All right. So here's general. We're meeting now. Here's the video for today's reading. If you're here, give me a thumbs up on that later. I'm going to take attendance that way. Although I got most people in the chat or in the meeting right now, but give it a thumbs up. Question about an assignment. Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. I'm going to open it so we can look at it. Short story 1, student view. All right. Here's the PDF. It has the work in it. If you open it up, hopefully it works on this stupid thing. It hasn't been working. There we go. Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. Here it is. It's 7 pages long. Okay? Once you're done reading that, I want you to go into the Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket work. What you're going to do here, as you can see, it's a little bit of a worksheet. You can't answer here. It's a PDF. It won't let you. What I want you to do is open this document, Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket work, and put your answers there. So if you know how to split your screen, you can split your screen so that you can see the questions and the document that you're typing in. That'd probably be the best. On a Windows device, you just grab this and you fling it over to the side, and it will put it on half the screen for you. And then you choose the other half, and then you could have 2 windows on the same screen. So that's Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. I also need you to be working in your novel groups. Okay. I expect you to be either reading, listening, or answering questions in your novel group for about an hour a day. Okay? Go over all the answers. If you want to read ahead, read ahead. But because we have a 3-hour minimum interaction for Mount Sac, I need you to be in there after we get off this until at least 11. So do whatever you need to do. Start a meeting. Like, I'm going to keep this meeting open. If you have any questions, you can pop back in. But I need you meeting in your novel groups for at least an hour. If at any time you have questions, pop back into this meeting, ask me a question, or go up to the chat, type it in chat. I will totally answer anything. No, don't print it and send a photo. I need everything in Teams. Somebody asked if they can print it and send a photo. If you open this right here, and you type in here and you hit close, it automatically saves it, and you don't have to print or email or send anything. Like, there is nothing else to do but click in there and do your work. And that's what I like about Teams. I don't have to be bogged down by emails. You don't have to remember if you saved it. Everything is automatically saved when you work in Teams. All I have to do is go up to my assignments. I'm going to do one I know you haven't done. So here we go. It's not turned in. You know why it's not turned in? Because we haven't done it yet. But when I click on this, it will show me any work that we have attached here. And I don't need to open an email and deal with clutter. It's all here. Keep it in Teams. Remember, you don't have to print. You don't have to do anything. In your novel groups, when you are doing work, I want it uploaded to this files tab. I only need one copy of work because we're all working on it together. So when you have it, you're going to put night answers. You're going to create a new document. You're going to type out your answers, and I'm going to look for it right here in this files tab under your novel group. I don't want anything emailed. I don't need anything getting lost. I know that if we start here, it it's going to be fine, and you're not going to have to worry about uploading, saving, and emailing. Everything stays within Teams. I don't know if you've used it like that with other classes before, but I love this fact, so this is kind of what we're doing. For those of you who have sent me vocab workshop stuff, awesome guys. Thank you very much. There will be a quiz on Friday. I'm going to send you a link. Each vocab that you do, each exercise that is above the line, and I will show you right now what I mean. All right. Everything that right here it says take tests, this will allow you to send it to me as a record. And I will give you 5 points toward your test for every one of these that you do. That means if you do 10, you still take the test on Friday, but you get 50 points of extra credit, which means you automatically get an A. I'm trying to get you to learn these words, not to catch you and say, haha, you suck, you don't remember what stolid means. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get you to practice, trying to get you to engage with your learning. If you want, you can do a word search. I did one the other day. I can't give you any test or any credit for it. Oh, I can't even do adulterate. There we go. I can't give you credit for it, but what it'll do is it'll help you practice. Once you select a word, it'll show you. To make impure by adding, it'll show you the definition over here. The test you are going to take on Friday. Let me go back. I'm going to probably give you a test that looks like definitions, maybe sentences. So you either have to know the definitions or use it in a sentence. Either one of those is fine. I'm going to send you a link, which I can right here, sentences. I send this link, I post it in there, and then you take a test. I'm going to let you take the test twice, and I will give you your best score. If you only want to take it once because you did all the extra credit, guess what? Take it once. My job is to get you to learn these words. Next week, we'll be starting with Unit 2. You'll be done with these words, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Like I said, if you're doing your vocab, if you're doing these and turning them into me, great. You get 5 points for every time you do one. Let's see, anything else? I need you to be in novel groups for a while. I also need, this is today's reading. I've given you Contents of the Dead Man's Pocket. I think that's it for today, guys. I need you meeting in your novel groups for the next hour, please. I'll be here in this meeting. I expect everybody to leave this meeting to go to their next meeting. Facilitators, remember, hit this button right here. It shows you exactly how to meet now. I saw people in there yesterday for a long time, so thank you very much. If you got people missing from your group, let me know. I'm messaging everybody every day that they are not here to make sure that I get as many people in the class as I can. Unless you have any questions, I think that's it for right now, guys. I'll see you guys later. Go ahead and leave this meeting and hop into your novel groups. Unless you have any questions.